If you allow a vacuum to develop, somebody will fill it. And we know who will fill it. Nigel Farage. He sat there with his little gang. It's a small gang, but they're a noisy gang and they are influential. And if the Tories are sitting around chatting about what went wrong for 6 months, Nigel Farage is just going to be in there and he will seize that initiative. John, it's a very different atmosphere in Parliament this week to the last 6.
Yeah, I mean, the atmosphere in Parliament's a bit weird because half the people there at the moment are MPs who've lost their seats, packing up their offices, who many of them are pretty disappointed to be leaving Parliament. Some of them knew it was coming and seem to have come to terms with it in the last few weeks and months. Some of them, it took them by surprise. And the other half of people are MPs arriving, new MPs who are giddy with excitement, are like people who've got the golden ticket, turning up on their first day of work. And so when you go down to Portcullis House, where MPs have their offices, it is just the tale of two types of people there. And some of them have been MPs for quite a long time. And because of that rush of results on election day, even now I'm seeing tweets from MPs saying, good luck to my successor. I've been so glad to be an MP that I hadn't even realised they'd lost their seats. And you see MPs, pretty senior MPs, just wheeling these trolleys along with boxes, just getting rid of their possessions. And whatever side of Parliament they're on, there is something just a bit quite sad about that, just seeing them packing up their lives and wondering what on earth they're going to do next.
Yeah, whatever side of the debate you're on, there are some really good people who've lost their seats. It always happens in elections. I spent quite a lot of time in Portcullis House yesterday. It's the beating heart of Parliament, and I was really struck by just the sheer scale of very, very young people wearing the lanyards, the stripy green and white lanyards that MPs wear. Well, they wear them for a few months, and then when they become very important and known, they all ditch them. But at the moment, they
partly wear them so that the doorkeepers and everyone else know that they are important. They should be respected.
But there's so many of them, and they're so young, and you just see the sea of faces that you don't know, and the kind of scale of change is quite clear to see. But also, like you say, there were a lot of Conservatives in Portcullis House yesterday. Chat to one ex-cabinet minister who's been around for 20 years, really good, honourable person, who I think they knew it was probably going to happen, but it wasn't a dead cert, and they were actually quite sanguine about it. Glass half full type of attitude. This is a new opportunity to do something else. There was a big group of red wallers there as well, and they were quite mixed, actually. Obviously, some still really very upset, understandably. Some actually seem to be relieved and feel like at least it's over now and we can just get on with the next phase of our life, and actually seemed quite upbeat, really, considering. But yeah, quite a really mixed picture, and it was just like all human life was there yesterday. Sad people, happy people, you know, and the new wave, the old era, and yeah, it's quite an interesting place to be.
Yeah, I was talking to one MP who was saying, I've spent the last few years campaigning about universal credit and saying now I literally am going to have to claim universal credit. And the problem for a lot of MPs is there are now a lot of former MPs looking for jobs. And so if you're one of those former Tory MPs, suddenly all these people who are looking to hire people, they want people with Labour contacts. They don't want people with Tory contacts. And so for some of them, they're just wondering, what on earth do I do? Go back to my old profession that I was doing before I was MP, or do I just try and do something completely different?
I mean, look, anyone who's actually made it to Parliament, it is such a tough battle to actually get there in the first place. So that gives you a whole set of skills that are really valuable. And then after that, if you've managed to kind of speak in public, do broadcast rounds, give interviews to local papers, actually affect change for your constituents. It doesn't matter whether you're on, your career was on the back benches. You can make significant changes. You can campaign on big issues, small issues. You can do a whole raft of things. Those skills are transferable. But yeah, in terms of perhaps like lobbying and public affairs, people aren't interested in the former Tory MPs at the moment. But all that wealth of skills and experience is valuable, and I'm sure they'll all be all right in the end. Anyway, John, I'm Sam Lister, political editor at The Express.
I'm John Stevens, political editor at The Mirror.
And this is The Division Bell. Since we last spoke on Friday, an awful lot's happened. Keir Starmer said he was going to hit the ground running, and he has. He appointed his new cabinet very, very quickly. They met for the first time on Saturday, and we saw a big speech on Monday from Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor. So how do you think it's going?
Well, I think the government clearly need to show that they are doing things quickly, and there were two key themes from what Rachel Reeves was saying yesterday. One is we're in a total mess as a country. She's talking about how the inheritance they've got is the worst since the Second World War. I think Labour are very keen to show that things aren't immediately going to get better, and they want to very much point the finger of blame at the Tories and say, whether we're dealing with the economy and the cost of living or the problems in prisons, the decisions they're having to take now are going to be difficult decisions because of what they've had to pick up. And they very much, I think you're going to hear that over and over again. And Rachel Reeves talked about how she'd ordered the Treasury to do this assessment of the true horrors that await in the Treasury and the state of the country's finances. And the other thing that she's very keen to do is saying we are taking action now. And she talked about how she wants there to be growth in the economy. I mean, that is basically the script we have from every chancellor, and we've had quite a few chancellors in the last couple of years. But all of them say, I want growth. But the only way you get that is not through words, it is through actions. And I think that's why they've been very keen to show that they're getting on with stuff, such as getting rid of the ban on wind farms on land, new ones being built, such as announcing that they're going to get on with the planning overhaul at the end of the month. And basically, the best time to do that is now. These are really tricky issues. There is the possibility that there will be some backlash. But Labour put these ideas in their manifesto. They've just had a thumping majority. They've got new MPs who will be, for the moment, loyal to the party leadership, you should hope. And so the time to do this is now, rather than wait a couple of years, procrastinate, and then realise we've got so much going on, we've got loads of crises, we can't do this. And Rishi Sunak talked a lot about how he wanted to make the difficult decisions, but the reality was that he was constantly battling with problems within his own party and worried about his own leadership, that he wasn't actually able to push through loads of these things.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, actually. I think that the greatest moment of power for a new government is the very start, but that is the point where actually they can procrastinate. And we saw from Tony Blair, the big lesson from him, he's been quite open about this, is that actually the first full term of the Blair era, they actually wasted a lot of time and opportunity because they were almost a bit too frightened in a way to actually do big things, to make big changes. It'd been such a long time since Labour had any power, and they were very, very cautious about what they did with it. But I think if Keir Starmer is going to actually get anywhere with any of the promises he made, he has got to crack on quite quickly. And also because the Tories are in the position they're in, he has a bit of a free rein, really. So if you're going to do something that is going to be potentially unpopular, if you were him, you'd do it when nobody's really looking at you closely and everybody's still thinking about, this new dawn, everyone's, all the new MPs are excited and nobody's really settled down. He can get quite a lot through when nobody's actually really looking at what he's doing.
Yeah, because the Tories haven't just been reduced in number, they are in a state of shock, really, that they're having to get used to the reality of the situation they're in. They aren't this big fighting force that they once were. And so things like housing, you do just need to get things done now. And if Labour is going to get growth in the economy, which is what they obviously will need to show to voters in 5 years' time, that people are feeling better, that the high streets do feel a bit like they've been spruced up a bit, people feel a bit not not necessarily richer, but they feel that things are going better for them and their community. If you're going to do that, then you do need to start planting the seeds for that pretty quickly if you're going to have any impact in 5 years' time. And I think that was the big lesson from Boris Johnson in 2019. He won that thumping majority, an 18-seat majority, or we used to call it a thumping majority. Maybe now
seems quite weedy now.
We assess that in light of Labour's one, which is more than twice the size of that. But he did have a lot of goodwill. He had a lot of these communities in Labour's traditional heartlands that lent their votes to the Tories over Brexit, who thought that they'd been told they'd been left behind for too long, they'd been forgotten, they were finally going to have a government that was going to make big changes for them. And I think at the election, people just looked and thought, that hasn't happened. And Keir Starmer seemed to acknowledge that when he had his big group photo with the new Parliamentary Labour Party, more than 400 MPs, that massive picture with loads of them. I think the photographers found it quite difficult to actually, how do you take a picture of so many people? Labour had to get a room where they could get together and do that somewhere outside of Parliament. But in his speech to MPs, he said that people who voted for us aren't necessarily Labour converts. A lot of them were annoyed about the Tory party. And if you come to election in 5 years' time, some people will still remember how it was under 14 years of the Tory party. But for a lot of people, that anger will have worked through the system. That won't be such a focus in people's minds. And so, therefore, if you are going to get this decade of renewal that Keir Starmer says the country needs, you are going to need to show people that you have managed to start making changes to their lives in the first 5 years.
I would just say on the Boris Johnson side of things, I mean, we will never know, will we, if COVID hadn't happened, would we be in a very different position now? Would Boris Johnson have actually used that majority? Would he have done the things he promised he would do? But I would also caution that is a lesson for Keir Starmer, because nobody predicted the pandemic or then the subsequent invasion of Ukraine. And I remember we were all writing 10 years of Boris Johnson. So a decade of renewal under Keir Starmer. Life comes at you fast.
We thought we were going to have decades of Theresa May, and that didn't work out. Then we thought we'd have decades of Boris Johnson. That didn't work out.
But events happen, and at the moment it all seems very calm and steady. But and we were in a very volatile world, as Keir Starmer himself has acknowledged. And who knows where we're going to be in 3 or 4 years' time? Anything could happen.
Well, isn't that part of the reason that Liz Truss made the catastrophic mistakes that she made? Was that the Queen died within days of her becoming Prime Minister, and people have said that that's what convinced her that events happen and you just have to get on with it. And that's why she announced that insane mini budget with all these tax cuts that she hadn't properly laid the ground for with the city, because she thought, well, this is my only chance. I have to just go. Yeah. And obviously, let's hope that Rachel Reeves doesn't do that. We should need to take some lessons. And also you look at the makeup of the country now, and there's over 400 Labour MPs, but I think it's around 93 in their seats. Nigel Farage's Reform Party's now in second place. And I think that will be a worry for some of those. Yeah. Obviously, Reform is a limited presence at the moment. It is just 5 MPs. I think we have to keep that in perspective. But if the Labour Party is going to be able to fight them off, the key way you do that is to show that you are delivering on your promises and you are making the country better. And if they aren't able to do that, then there will be a risk that Reform are able to kind of increase their vote share in those seats and become a real challenge to Labour at the next election.
Yeah, Nigel Farage has made it very clear that after going for the Tories, which he really did, mercilessly, he is now turning his fire on Labour. And I do remember in the previous incarnation, not the Brexit Party, the one before, the UKIP Party, when he was leader there, he held 2 party conferences in Doncaster, and he did
hometown
it.
Of Sam Lister,
obviously,
centre of the universe,
always. But he did that very deliberately. He said, because obviously Ed Miliband was leader at the time of the Labour Party, he said very deliberately he was parking his tanks on Labour's lawns. It was a sign. It was we're coming for Labour voters, and obviously those voters then went on to kind of become Borisites, but they are up for grabs, and they feel very let down by Labour over the years, which is why they look to Farage and then to Boris, and will possibly look to Farage again. So it is. I think it's something that Labour are going to have to be very conscious about.
So the Labour reshuffle or mini reshuffle, there weren't too many changes. It's not the only switch around of teams. Rishi Sunak's had a slight change around of his front bench team, but I think the Tories have got a real problem now. That how do you stay relevant, and does anyone really care who's kind of shadow whatever all these jobs are?
This is a big problem actually, and I think this goes to the heart of what happens next. So the party, clearly there's lots of recriminations and lots of accusations, and that people are looking to work out what went wrong. Was it Reform? Was it the Lib Dems? Was it Labour? Where did we lose? Why did we lose? I mean, to be fair, they lost to all three, and that's quite a difficult challenge, isn't it? How do you regroup when you've hemorrhaged votes on all sides? Now, clearly they are going to have to appoint a new leader. Rishi Sunak has said he will stay on, but I don't think anybody really believes that it's tenable for him to kind of continue for a long time. So there might be a point where there is a caretaker leader. That's not really been decided. But over the next week, the grandees in the party will decide the new rules for the next Tory leadership. The rules can change every time. They can set whatever rules they want. And certainly one of the kind of most senior people involved in these types of things told me last week that they believed it should be a very quick contest, because if you don't do a quick contest, you lose ground to Labour. They will, as we've just been discussing, they're going to move very quickly, and they're going to do some quite radical things. So between now and October, a lot of big things will have probably happened under Labour. We will probably have seen a budget that could be quite radical. And so there's a certain school of thought that thinks this has to all be sorted out very, very quickly. Otherwise, Labour are just going to seize the agenda, and they will set the kind of the narrative, as it's called, the tone of this debate for years to come. Now, a lot of the party now, though, are swinging to let's have a really long contest. Let's work out exactly where we went wrong. Let's work out how we regroup and go forward. There's talk about this could go on right up until Christmas. And I just fear that if they go down that route, it's going to be an awfully long way back for the Conservatives. Yes, it's been brutal. It's been a really devastating result for them, but they've got to pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and crack on. You know, if you allow a vacuum to develop, somebody will fill it, and we know who will fill it. Nigel Farage. He sat there with his little gang. It's a small gang, but they're a noisy gang, and they are influential. And if the Tories are sitting around chatting about what went wrong for 6 months, Nigel Farage is just going to be in there, and he will seize that initiative.
I think the Tories do need a proper assessment of what went wrong. I also think that the country does need an opposition that is in a place where it can actually properly scrutinise what the government's doing on either side. But if the Tory party just does turn into itself, we know what their kind of tendencies are. Fine, if you were going to have a sensible conversation about what went wrong, but if it's just going to descend into several months of infighting that people won't care about in the same way that we've had Tory leaderships in the past. We've had quite a few of them in the last couple of years. But for each of them, the country was probably interested because whoever won it automatically was to become the Prime Minister of the country. That's not going to be the case this time. They're basically picking the new William Hague, Michael Howard, Ian Duncan Smith. And I think they're going to have a reality check when they're back in the House of Commons, that we look at the graphs, we look at the numbers, we can see the great numbers of Labour MPs that have been elected. But I think there will be something quite psychological for those MPs that are left when they are there in the Commons chamber. And in the seats where you used to have Tory MPs, you have got this army of new Labour MPs. And then you do have this reduced rump of Tory MPs and all the difficulties that do come with opposition, because, number one, you lose money because you get short money from the House of Commons to support you in opposition. You lose all the machinery of government because you no longer have government press officers. working for you, all the support staff. And you also lose relevance because until now, anything that a Tory minister said became news in all papers because it could have an impact on people's lives. And now anything the Tories announce, they don't have any chance to actually enact it for 5 years. And so they are going to find it really difficult to make news over the next few years. And I think that when they are sat there in the House of Commons, I think there is going to be a proper reality check about how things really have changed for them.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. And I think part of the issue for them now is if they do go for this really long, protracted contest, it just risks looking really self-indulgent. And part of the reason people turned away from the Conservatives is because they spent so many years fighting each other. And people are very turned off by that. They want to hear politicians talking about them and their lives. They don't want to hear them, taking seven bells out of each other. It's just not very appealing. And so we saw from the Liz Truss Rishi Sunak leadership contest a couple of years ago, that dragged on far too long. And became
from covering it went too long. Especially the whole
awful,
summer, wasn't it?
It was very, very, very. Yeah. Anyway, let's not go there. But it was very protracted, and it became actually quite bitter, and it heaped pain on an already in pain party. And I think so. Esther McVeigh, she wrote an op-ed for us, a comment piece for this. For our paper this week. And she said in it, the Conservatives spent too long fighting each other. She says they've broken the Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not ever criticise another Conservative. And it's like...
That's all they've done for the last few years.
I mean, that really is all they've done. And so if you have a really long, protracted battle, 6 months of people just attacking each other, we need to tack to the right, we need to tack to the centre, you're wrong, fighting, it's just going to be so unedifying. And actually, they do just need to, ultimately you're in opposition now. You're not choosing a new Prime Minister. Just get on with it. We know who the candidates are. We know what they stand for. And actually, some of the candidates who were hoping to run but now can't for circumstances beyond their control, let's put it that way, the voters have spoken, had actually written manifestos. So, let's not pretend. People have been planning this for an awfully long time. All those people are ready to go. All the people in the party pretty much know where they stand on those candidates. So why drag this out? I think it would be a real mistake. And
that was the weirdness of watching the political shows on Sunday when you had Robert Jenrick and Vicky Atkins, both people that everyone knows are hoping to run in the leadership race, both on with Laura Kuenssberg, both refusing to say whether they were going to run or not. And I realised that there was that feeling, well, maybe that was a moment to pay tribute to MPs who've lost their seats, and maybe it wasn't properly the time to get on and have a scrap. But I think at some point they just need to get on with it.
You've just got to rip off that plaster, haven't you, at some point? And I think, let's just see them get on with it now. We don't want a summer battle, do we? We all need to go on holiday, John, don't we?
We're talking about travelling and holidays.
This is work, John, not holidays.
After touring the country for 6 weeks during the election campaign, and then Keir Starmer, after he got in, he's done this Four Nations tour where he went up to Scotland and then Northern Ireland, Wales, and then back to England. He's now going to be heading on a plane to Washington, DC. I mean, if he's anything like me or you, I think could just do with the rest. But actually, this summer is really good timing for him, isn't it? Just a few days after he's become Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, it's great for him, isn't it? He gets to be seen on the world stage. He gets to hobnob with all the most important people globally. He gets to meet President Biden. It will be his first meeting with President Biden. There'll also be obviously other key leaders there, Macron, Olaf Scholz.
This is a NATO, I should have said, this is a NATO
summit.
Sorry,
it's a NATO summit, yeah. So it's a great opportunity for him to be seen as an important figure, but also to actually make those contacts and have those informal chats. They've all got various different bizarre names, haven't they? Like brush by, which is, I think, a brush by is a kind of 2 minutes standing up at the side of a meeting, but you know, a brush by is the lowest rung, shall we say, of those. But then you go all the way up to a bilateral, which is a proper sit-down, face-to-face, one-on-one meeting between two leaders. And that is the one that everybody wants to secure with, obviously, Joe Biden. It should be quite interesting. But anyway, Keir Starmer has got the absolute pleasure of having both me and you sat at the back of his plane.
One of the perks of being Prime Minister.
I'm sure he's thrilled.
Woo!
I'm sure he's absolutely delighted. And we will get to chat to him on that plane and get to throw at him all kinds of questions, not just on the summit, but on all kinds of domestic policies. And I think actually, in summits gone by, I think sometimes Prime Ministers are a bit shocked that you don't ask them just about their important international work. Rishi Sunak actually used to get quite irritated by journalists asking domestic questions at international summits because he was doing important things and we weren't really giving that due diligence, really. But I think for Keir Starmer, this is going to be a bit of a shock to him that you've got the whole press pack there just throwing all kinds of things at him. And we will do that on the plane, but also there is a press conference at the end. He has no control over what we throw at him at that. So he will have to be...
Questions rather than objects, hopefully.
Yes, no objects, questions only. But yeah, so it will be an interesting test to see how he deals with being the Prime Minister. He's no longer the one opposing. He has to answer the questions now.
Yeah, and different Prime Ministers have had quite different styles on these trips. So... I mean, as you said, on the plane on the way there, you usually get a huddle, which is where the Prime Minister comes back. You always see those photos of Prime Ministers on planes surrounded by journalists, and they do an on-the-record question-answer. And then when it was Theresa May, that was basically the only time you'd see Theresa May. Boris Johnson, you did see a bit more of him sometimes on the way back from a trip. He'd pop back to the back of the plane. David Cameron used to quite enjoy that as well. Yeah. On the way home, just have a casual chat off the record. Rishi Sunak really seemed to enjoy hanging out at the back of the plane. I mean, we did a couple of trips with him. His first trip was when it was a G20 meeting in Bali, in Indonesia. And on the way there, I've never seen someone spend so much time at the back of the plane talking to journalists. Yeah. And it was like, at some point, we're going to have to sleep.
Yeah,
at some point, we're going to run out of enthusiasm for talking to you, Rishi Sunak. But he really seemed to enjoy it. And we went to the White House with him, I think it was last June. Yeah. And on the way back, I mean... This is one of the best bits of being Prime Minister, isn't it? Going to these world summits and you turn up in your own plane, the red carpet's there, you've got all these people saluting, you get to go to the White House and meet the president and everyone's calling you Mr. Prime Minister. I mean, I would be giddy with excitement if it was me. But when we did the White House trip with Rishi Sunak, I've never seen someone... I mean, he was just... Talk about being high with sugar and Haribo and Mexican Coke or whatever he enjoys. He just absolutely was delighted to have been to the White House. He came to the back of the plane, was telling us how he was crushing it on the world stage. It did make me cringe. I just thought, maybe never say that about yourself. But it will be interesting to see what is Keir Starmer's style. He's obviously been used to travelling around random parts of the country with journalists. But now, as you say, he is going to be Prime Minister and he's going to have... These things are quite high stakes, dealing with people like the American president. Obviously, Theresa May went and saw Donald Trump, who was always totally predictable. We obviously had the famous picture of him holding her hand. I think it's probably more likely Keir Starmer will be holding Joe Biden's hand rather than the other way around, considering his health. But it's going to be slightly tricky for number 10. How do you deal with the problem of Joe Biden's health when there are all these lingering questions about it at the front of people's minds, and this discussion about does he stand as the Democratic candidate when they have the election later this year? And those questions are going to be being asked whilst he's on this trip, whilst Joe Biden is there at the White House. And Joe Biden gave an interview at the weekend where he said the only person who would persuade him that he shouldn't be the candidate is God Almighty. There are certainly a lot of people in the Democratic Party who think that maybe he should listen to them rather than just God Almighty.
I think it is a big issue, clearly, internationally. But it's a bit of a test for Keir Starmer, actually, because he is bound to be asked about this. If it's not me or you, John, somebody else will ask him this question about Joe Biden's health. And he has to come up with a way of responding to that doesn't obviously upset the president himself, who he's about to meet for the first time, but also isn't, I mean, clearly everyone can see with their own eyes the situation with Joe Biden. And so Keir Starmer can't kind of brush it aside. I think it was interesting at the G7 during the election campaign when Rishi Sunak was out there with the with other leaders, and Joe Biden, there was obviously that clip of him when the parachutes were landing and he appeared to wander off, and then people have said later actually there was another parachute landing and that's why. But he did seem to be wandering off, and they did seem to be, I think it was Giorgia Meloni, the Italian premier, who kind of put her hand on his back and had to kind of guide him back in. And there does seem to be a lot of that people are trying to kind of protect him and look after him, but that's not a tenable situation, is it? It's just not. It's a terrible situation, and so I think it's quite an interesting one for Keir Starmer to have to navigate. Really, it's going to be quite an interesting trip, I think. And we, as I say, we've done a few of these trips, John, haven't we? And there's been some quite memorable moments. And
what goes on tour stays on tour.
That is true.
Right, let's move on. I think we're running out of time. Sam, what's your moment of the week?
My moment of the week was the press conference Reform held on Friday. It was the impromptu gathering after they secured 5 seats, which was against initial expectations at the start of the election campaign. Obviously, Nigel Farage was cock-a-hoop. He's finally been elected after 8 times of trying. So they held this press conference, and there was just protester after protester. They'd obviously kind of staged it so that one would start protesting, they'd get dragged out, then another one would start, and this went on for quite some time. But the thing about Nigel Farage is he can deal, he's water off a duck's back. He knows how to work that crowd. He knows how to deal with. So he just started shouting, boring, boring, and just went to war with them, basically. And it was almost self-defeating, as often these protests are. I don't know who they're trying to appeal to, because these are 5 people who've just been elected. The people have spoken. You're going in there to protest. To what aim, I don't know. And actually, Nigel Farage will always beat you in that scenario. And I think we saw that there.
And my moment of the week is poor Tobias Ellwood, one of the Tories who have lost his seats. He was an MP in Bournemouth, used to be a defence minister, and then was on the Defence Select Committee until they got rid of him for things he'd said about the Taliban and Afghanistan. And after being removed by voters as the MP, he put a video on Instagram saying that he had aspirations to become Tory leader. And I mean, God loves a trier, but I don't think there was anyone in the Tory party who had aspirations for him to become their leader. And so maybe it's a good thing that he's had a reality check now.
I don't ever remember a Tobias wing of the party, if I'm honest. So I think you're absolutely spot on that one, John.
Right, we will be back on Thursday, or it may not be us, it may be some fill-in replacements, but do contact us, the Division Bell at reachplc.com.
Bye for now. Thank you for listening. This is a Reach Studio production hosted by myself, Sam Lister, and John Stevens. Produced and edited by Lydia O'Malley, Shabir Nurzai. Our researcher is Sheila Mahmoodi, and design and art direction by Curtis Phillips Cozier and Luke Stidson. Audio managed by Matt Millard, and social content managed by Gully Burrows and Ed Washington. Content production and design overseen by Yara Silver, Harry Dumanel, and Spencer Robotham.